Well, we're back. Welcome to the third episode of the Pediatric Practice Management Media Cast. Thank you for giving us the title, Brandon. My name is Chip Hart. I work for a company called PCC. We work with pediatric practices, and with me I have Brandon Betancourt. Brandon, say hello.
Hello there, I'm Brandon Betancourt, and I am a practice administrator for a small pediatric practice in the western suburbs of Chicago. Last time I saw the email, Chip, the video, and I said in the western suburbs of Algonquin. Algonquin is the city where we're in the western suburbs of Chicago. So I wanted to clarify that. I'm not getting nervous in front of the camera. I don't know if you've noticed.
No, I don't think you really get nervous in front of the camera. First of all, before we start today, I really want to thank everyone who has written with comments and suggestions. Brandon and I read every single one of them and listen to every one of you. The feedback is wonderful. We have a long, endless list of topics. We're hoping that each episode gets a little bit better and a little bit faster and a little bit tighter. In the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm hoping we're going to find a good permanent place for these videos so that you know where to come to get them and you're able to find them every time. We've also done the work to convert these to a podcast so you can listen while you're on the treadmill. Apparently people do that. I've never been on a treadmill, so I couldn't tell you. Or or in your car. And so over the next couple weeks, things are only going to get better. Keep the suggestions coming. Today's topic, Brandon, what are we going to talk about?
I think we should talk about billing companies and billing services and what are our insights and what we've learned with those topics. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great one, and it's one that it's a topic that has become something I talk about at least weekly, if not daily. You know, a couple of years ago, I never really thought about billing services, but now they've become very prevalent, and I think there are some things that we can teach pediatric practices, especially because you, Brandon, you use a billing service, and you have sort of an insight and perspective that not a lot of people have.
Absolutely. Our situation is a little bit different, and I've also have been struggling with this kind of topic because there seems to be two camps on this. One camp is that you should never have a billing company and everything should be done in-house, and then there are those of us that say, well, but I kind of have to have one, and here are the reasons why. So I struggled with that, and we were trying to understand what was the best approach. And to tell you a little quick story, we had an outside billing company, and we didn't have their software, so there was no communication whatsoever other than just a few monthly reports. So all my data was at least 15 to 20 days behind schedule. I didn't like that, so that's when we decided to bring in the billing in-house, and we bought a PM system, and we hired somebody, one person, because that's all we could afford, to run our billing. Well, that was a complete disaster. The person was not as qualified as we thought she was, and we had to part ways. And then we were here with a problem. We don't have a biller. We have a system. Very few of us trained on the system. Only one person did, who's no longer at the practice. And the other thing is that I, for example, get bored to death with billing. That's like I can't stand staying on the phone for just a few more minutes trying to fight with somebody. So it's not my strength. It's not what I do. I know my limitations, and that's one of them. So I was scrambling for another biller because it had been 3 months since we had sent out a statement. Can you believe that? So I talked to a buddy of mine, and he says, well, I have a solution for you. We have this company that is a billing company, and they have the same software that you have. And they can dial in and work as if they, virtually, of course, they can dial in and work as if they were there in your office. So I thought, well, that's a good kind of to get up and running, and they were able to jump in really quickly. So there was no learning curve for the software. They knew the software very well, and the data still remained with me. So I can look at the screen and look and see exactly what was going on, see what got posted that day. I could post myself. I could run reports, and I knew exactly where we were at. So that's how we decided to go ahead and move forward, and that's how I kind of stumbled upon my situation. And a little bit later, I do want to talk about my feelings and how we've kind of evolved that. But that's kind of how we selected our how we selected our billing company. But I wanted, before I go on and dominate the conversation, I wanted to ask you from somebody that's looking for a billing company, what would you suggest would be kind of the things to look for in a billing company?
I do have a list. For years, I advocated against billing services all the time, and although it was somewhat self-serving, it was based on the fact that PCC creates a practice management system, and we really believe, and I still do believe, that no one collects money better than a good in-office staff. I mean, if you have good staff, if you can get good people, you will always collect money better. However, I kept running into circumstances over the years where a practice, just like you described, a practice couldn't actually make it happen. The day that it really, the light bulb went off in my head was when one of our practices, small practice, 4 docs, 5 docs, 3 billing office people, 3 back office people. One of them retired, one of them had workman's comp, and the other one got pregnant. And all of a sudden, they had no billing office. And they knew that they were going to get 2 of the people back in about 6 months, but they didn't have a solution for 6 months. And that's where I felt, I was like, no matter how great our system might be or may not be, the fact is they need the warm bodies.
Yeah.
And so I also realized, Brandon, I have to give you some credit. You said something that I don't think enough pediatric practices realize. Not everybody is good at hiring, or not everybody wants to focus on the billing. Recognizing what you're good at and focusing on that is a really important thing to do. And some practices take years and years to actually get good at doing their billing finally. Now, some of them do it right away, and I love those practices, and that's why I work with every day. But if you're one of those practices, especially a new practice starting out, who you may not have a lot of cash reserves, you need to get going. Your office opens in a month. You may not be able to find that rock star office manager or that rock star biller, and a billing service is what you're looking for. Yeah. So let me tell you the features of a billing service that I look for when talking to my clients. I've got my list here. That's what I'm looking at. What's that?
I think that in my view, and let me see what you think about this. In my view, that circumstance that you mentioned, the 3, I think that was a special circumstance, right? Because 3, you would think that you're safe with 3 different billers, right? Because what I would say, until you can afford, if you're a small practice, and of course the context here is a small practice. Our practice is small, 3 providers. So, but I think that if you can't afford more than 2 billers, then I think I would strongly suggest or recommend then for you to have a service that do your billing, because what we were talking is to describe if you have only 1 or 2, and if one leaves, it's just too much for that other person. 1, and then 2, if both of them leave, you're up a creek. And if you only have 1, you have. I mean, there's you're putting way too many eggs in one basket, in my view, with the livelihood of the practice. And if anything happens with that person, then you're going to be up a creek unless you have another replacement. So that's what I say. You have to be big enough to afford at least 3 billers, and moving forward, I think that would be. What do you think about that?
I think you've got a good point. There's always a math problem here, and certainly what happens is that the first biller you hire internally costs you the most. A good biller, a really good experienced biller, can handle more than 1 provider. So if you're a 1 provider practice and you then go hire a biller for, I'm making up a number, $40,000, okay, that may actually be more expensive than a billing service, who is much more incrementally based. And of course, the larger you get, the tighter that little step graph gets. But I think you're right. At the same time, as I'm sure you agree, every practice is a little bit different. If you're in a circumstance where maybe it's a husband, a man or woman physician, and the spouse is the biller. I've seen plenty of those work well, though I've seen plenty work very poorly. It really boils down to what you have available, employment-wise, in front of you. If you can find, like that first person you hired, if you'd gotten lucky and gotten the right person, you probably wouldn't be with a billing service now. But getting lucky is not a good business plan. And
the one thing that I wanted to bring up is that our circumstances have led us to this kind of thing. Right. So it's not like I'm suggesting this to be everybody, but this is how we've been able to manage based on the circumstances. The other thing that I wanted to mention real quick before you jump into your what things to look for, is that I think that it's important also to measure, and this is very difficult, I understand, but I think it is worthwhile to measure what the cost of your peace of mind is as well. For me, I have so maybe I am paying a little bit more with my billing service than I would a biller, but it's a less. I'm paying for not having more headaches. So, for example, if my biller goes on vacation or the one that's assigned to me, it's not my problem. If that biller decides to quit, that is not my problem.
Right.
If the biller wants a raise, that's not my problem. So those are things that's just one less employee that I'm having the benefit of another employee, but without having all the headaches of having a real employee. And I consider the person that's assigned to our biller and, our employee, and in fact, I often feel bad when we have our get-togethers, our practice get-together, because she's in Boston actually, and we won't get to invite her to none of our our functions. So I feel a little bit guilty in a weird kind of way that it's like, man, I wish Diane could come and spend some time with us because we know her so well, but only basically through the phone. So anyway,
well, what's interesting, Brandon, is that because you use a billing service, it clearly frees your time. Yeah. To work on the other aspects of the practice. We probably couldn't do this video blog if you were having to deal with Blue Cross Blue Shield today.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to go ahead and I know that I interrupted you a few times, but what are the things to look for, Chip?
Okay, ready? I think I have 7 things. Woo! And yeah, but I'm a fast talker, you know that. Okay, so if a friend of mine approaches me and says, "Hey, I'm looking at a billing service. What do I need to know?" The first thing you're going to look at is, what do they know about pediatrics? That's huge. That should be obvious, but a lot of people overlook it. I worked with a practice in Florida who had a billing service who didn't believe in using the new IMS admin codes. Okay, what did that cost them? $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year? And why didn't they believe in the IMS admin codes? Who knows? The fact is, each specialty has very different rules, and everyone listening to this video blog should know this, have very different rules for coding and what your expectations should be on everything from pricing to collections. You need to work with a vendor who understands pediatrics. That's number 1. Number 2, you need to work with a vendor who you know is responsive, and you're going to find out if they're responsive by saying, "Hey, can you give me a list of your other pediatric clients?" I worked with another practice in Atlanta earlier this year where I called into their system because they had a billing system I could access even though the billing service was running it, and I saw claims that were over a year old that had never even been billed. Yeah. I could see that they had sent some statements out, but not all. And the thing is, this doctor would call and call and call the billing service and email the billing service and never get a call back. And I think part of the problem was that this practice was so small and the pediatric money is so small that the billing services don't care. Yeah. I actually did it just dawned on me, I did a blog about this 4 or 5 years ago, and I explained how pediatricians are really going to suffer with a lot of billing services because, with the advent, or with the real input, or rather the arrival of electronic claims, the first 80 or 90% of every dollar that you should collect is so much easier than it used to be. It's that last 10 or 15% or 20% that's a lot harder to collect. And in pediatricians, you live and die on that 10 or 20%. So the billing services actually today, they have the first part of their job is easier, but the second part is a lot harder. And here's the thing. Imagine you're a billing service, and you want to collect on this $100 visit for the practice. You get the first $80, no problem. The last $20, of which you might get
if it takes you double the time to get that $20, you're like, let's focus more on the 80.
Yeah, exactly, and that's one thing as a pediatrician you really have to worry about. So that's the second item. So pediatric specific responsiveness. Oh, and I merged 2 together, so it'll be 6. You need to have references. You must have references. All right. The next thing I look for is I really want a billing service that provides you with well-defined roles. What is the billing service doing? What are you expected to do? I can't sit here and tell you that your billing service must post time of service charges or time of service payments or so on. But you know what? As the practice, you need to know, are you paying the billing service for all money collected or just the money that comes in that they post? I mean, there's not a right or wrong answer. You just need to know. I mean, and you know what I'm talking about there. Your billing service is pretty good about that, but I've worked with some who, a practice's AR goes through the roof, and then they come along and say, oh well, we never sent those claims. You're the billing service. So well-defined roles are important. I think again, I'm not going to say that there's a right or wrong, but I think you need to determine before you sign up with the billing service whether the billing service is local to you, not local to you, or even out of this country. You gave a good example. Your primary biller is located in Boston, which is great. You have a good relationship. You communicate. That's awesome. Some people are surprised when they find out that the people doing their billing are in another country. And there's not a right or wrong there, but you just need to know what your expectations are.
Yeah, it's important to know, and yeah, it's just something important that you need to know.
All right, you hit on my second to last item really nicely. This is gigantic. You need to have access to your data. You need to know that any day that you wake up and you decide that you want to do something else or get a better look at your own reports, you have access to that data. Most billing services control or lock down your access to your own data substantially, and they make it very difficult for you to leave. So having access to your data is vital. The last and most important thing, the thing that really has upset me about billing services over the last couple of years, is the language in their contracts. Oh, no, you know what? I skipped one, so I did have 7, sorry. Is the language in your contracts. I worked with a billing service. I'll tell you two stories. I worked with a billing service in the greater Baltimore area that signed a contract with the practices that meant that at any point, if the practice wanted to leave, they had this evergreen contract. The practice had to pay a year's worth of billing service fees at any time. So yes, you can get out of your contract, but to get out of your contract, you must pay us the next year's worth of your fees. So even if someone else collects the money, if you switch to another billing service or you bring it in-house, you must pay us your overhead, your 6 or 8 or 10% on those payments. I worked with a practice
right there for that, because oftentimes, this is a common advice. You say, yeah, it's important for you to read the contract. Have you ever read a contract? And I know you have. I know this is a rhetorical question. It is the most difficult thing to ever decipher. So when you're a small practice and you really don't have a good idea and you don't have access to experts, you don't have access to all these things, maybe an attorney, but it's like a $400 bill just for 30 minutes for them to take a look at a contract, and you're struggling as it is, what are the tools that you can, and we don't need to go into this, but at one point I guess it's very difficult to know what is appropriate or what not. So if I'm seeing it in a contract, my guess is that if they have multiple customers, that they also sign this contract, therefore this is probably the norm. So that comes very difficult for us on this side that just don't have a lot of resources to understand, well, is this the norm or is this these guys are trying to pull one over us?
Well, I'll tell you it's both. It is the norm, and they are trying to pull one over on you. And what I'll tell you is this. I know a lot of people are just starting out, and I know that money is tight, but that $400 that you spend on an attorney reading your contract is obviously going to be worth tenfold or even 100-fold of that if there's a problem. But when in doubt, if you have a funky contract, look, Brandon, this is what I say. Go here.
Excellent.
SOAPM, all right? You can post your contract on SOAPM. There are 10 of us who are super nerdy and will read it. I worked with a practice. This is a SOAPM office, too. I know they're on the SOAPM list, and I'll see if they identify themselves later. I worked with a practice who has a billing service who sent me their agreement to say, hey, what do I need to do to get out of this? I looked through the agreement. God's honest truth. This is Scout sign, all right? I'm a Boy Scout guy. So here's my Scout sign. The contract said if the parties decide to cancel the contract, if either party decides to cancel the contract, the practice must pay $40,000. So it reads, if you're just blowing through it, like, okay, so at any point, if I decide to get out of this contract, I have to pay $40,000, which is insane, okay? Why should I pay for $40,000, especially if they're not performing? But if the vendor, if the billing service decided to cancel the contract, the practice had to pay $40,000.
Oh, okay. Also, all right.
Also, all right. So the last item, and this is one that's this is a sophisticated one. It's pretty tricky. It's one that you know about because you work with a billing service that doesn't trap you like this, but I've dealt with some interesting ones. Practices need to know that your choice of a billing service can absolutely affect the EHR that you might want to use down the line. So when you first start, the first thing you're looking at is, boy, what, you know, how am I going to get my bills paid? You don't want to wake up at 12 months later and find out, oh, now that I'm on this billing service, I can only use the following EHRs, or I can use whatever EHR I want, but it won't actually work with my billing service. There are some pretty well-known, very large EHR practice management companies who buy billing services in a locality for that very reason. You know, let's say there's an effective billing service in, you know, Washington, D.C. They have 2,000 doctors of all kinds of specialties. The vendor buys the billing service. Practice by practice by practice, they move them over to the new software, which is great. That's why you would expect a vendor to buy a billing service. But guess what? Those 2,000 doctors are now locked into that vendor's EHR, whether they like it or not. Yeah. If they want to keep their billing service, which probably has a contract that would cost them a fortune to get out of, then they have to use the EHR. And that sort of contractual lockdown is something I see over and over and over again. You need a billing service that you pay when you're happy, that you pay when they do their job. Otherwise, you don't have to pay them. All right. So
that's a difficult one, because even with us, and we have a billing company that doesn't lock us down. But the other portion of that is that when you're so vested into a practice management system, and you're going to be moving to another to another service, it gets very tricky. Now, I got so lucky with my transition, because this is what happened. Let me tell you what happened. With, I want to go back and tell you why we did what we did, and kind of how we've perfected this how I've resolved this whole, when I first started talking about this whole camp of people. You have to have billing in-house, and you have to have a billing company. So I think that I've done a good job in resolving these two issues as it pertains to us. I'm not saying that this is a solution for anybody. So, but what we did is, one of the things that took me a long time to move over to another practice management system was the fact that I was going to have to leave my billing company behind. And as I mentioned, I'm very comfortable with them. They do an excellent job for us. One of the things that I like about them is that they're a mom and pop shop, but they're big enough to offer diversity, but they're small enough where I can call the owner and, you know, have a one-on-one. And we've had plenty of one-on-ones where we both sit there. There's no agenda. We both explain our part of the business, you know, what's important for us, and then we try to come to the middle, which I find very unusual in many cases. Dave from BBS is the name of the company, Bookkeeping and Business Services, I think is what they're called, in Boston. And I'll be more than happy to recommend him. I think to give him a shout out. But anyways, I've sat with him multiple times throughout the year, and you know, we've come to certain agreements, and I'll later tell you what kind of agreement that we've come up with. But I was very disappointed, because I was just like, man, I'm going to have to leave these guys behind. So when I called Dave, as soon as I signed the contract with the other company, and I knew that we were going to be transitioning, as I spoke in my last video, I told him, I said, hey, Dave, listen, you know, this is what, you know, this is our position. This is why we think long term. This is why it's going to work for us. And I gave him all my. And he's like, hey, Brandon, would you consider bringing us along with you? And I was just like, Dave, I was going to ask you, would you consider coming along with us? Right. So we both were on the same page, and he said, Brandon, I actually work with multiple multiple software. We're a billing company. So software is important, but essentially we are a billing company. So we will work within reason. We will work with the software that your company, you know, that your practice has. And I was so relieved, even though I had something very good lined up, and I think it would have worked out well. I still, you know, change is a bitch, and it was already. Sorry for the French there. Change is terrible, and then so moving. See, that threw me off. I said a bad word, and now it threw me off.
It's okay. We'll beep it out someday.
Uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable is what I meant to say, and so it was great, because the biller that I've been speaking about, she was in our call with us, and our vendor trained her as well, just as that she would have trained us. And now, you know, it was a seamless for us. Essentially, it was seamless, and we didn't have to move anything over. We have now a biller that understands both of our systems, understands exactly where we were at, and that has been tremendous. And I know that probably isn't the norm for everybody, and that was, I mean, we were completely lucky. I think that that's just something the way it was. I would have never been able to anticipate that, or even known to have asked that question back in the day. but it just turned out. But I think that working with a company that is flexible, identifying those sort of things on how flexible that company is, I think will lend itself to maybe helping you at least have some hope that that person or that company will work with you as you are evolving, because that's another thing. Practices grow, or downsize also. So now what you were pulling in for them now is different because they bill on what you get. You bill. So then all of a sudden, if you have 3 or 4 doctors, and all of a sudden you go down to 2 or to 1, I mean that's an impact for them too.
Yep.
They have to make adjustments. But so yeah, that's kind of my thing. So that worked out really well for me, and I just can't tell you how happy I am about that worked out for me.
Well, I know your billing service because I've spoken with them, and I like them because they are responsive to you. They are recognized that they provide a service, and a good service company understands that you shouldn't be paying for them unless you're providing good service. And the fact also that your billing company, as you said, talks to you a couple times every quarter, every quarter, a couple of years, and interacts with you. A good billing service understands that the success of the practice is their own success as well. The better the practice works, the more money and revenue they generate, the better the billing service is going to do as well. Too many billing services just rely on that easy 80%. Once you sign up with electronic claims, there's just an automatic cash flow process no matter how bad you are, and they do the math. The good billing services are the ones who turn an average practice into an exceptional practice. One of the billing services I work with actually has gotten very aggressive in a great way lately, doing patient recall for the practices, just calling them up and saying, look, I'm going to go find, you told me last week that you had a ton of flu vaccines left in the fridge. Do you mind if we call everyone who needs a flu shot? Do you mind if we send out a phone call or an email, to everyone who needs a well visit? And we talked about recall a couple episodes ago, and when to see a billing service do that, that's awesome. It's good for the kids.
It makes perfect sense because it's a way for them to go find more business.
Right.
It's the best of both worlds because the practice is gaining the business, they are gaining the business, and they are complementing the practice. They are just a true partnership. It's a true partnership as opposed to, I'm just going to do this service for you, and if you're not bringing any money, then I don't have to do any work. So I love that. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's good medicine, and how it is a very rare thing to work with a billing service that actually understands.
Well, give a shout out. Give a shout out to our company. Who is that?
Well, the company that I'm talking about is PEDS One. It's a company that specifically works with PCC, though PCC doesn't own it. They're just another company. In fact, we wanted to keep the two entities separate. They do only pediatric billing. They use our software, but one of the reasons why we agreed to work with them, even though there's no actual contract, that we said to them, we are only going to mention your name if you have contracts that don't lock the customers in. So it's 6 months later, or let's say it's a new practice, they get up and going, they want to use a billing service for 2 or 3 years and then be gone, bring it in-house. I want a contract that will let them do that. And the nice part is, and you could do this with, I'm just talking about our experience, you can do this with your own vendor if you like your practice management system. A practice can then 2 or 3 years later bring it in-house, and they actually have their own software agreement with us. They don't have to get it through the vendor. Their data is their own data. That piece of it makes us so much more comfortable to work with the vendor. So it's PEDS One. I'll give a shout out to them and to Tim Rushford. A lot of people know Tim. I'd be glad to put you in touch. And I will mention a distinct competitor of ours. If someone approaches me and says I'm only going to use a billing service, I think it'd be inappropriate for me not to mention Athena Health. They compete with us. I hate them for that reason, but they're good. They like any vendor, they're not perfect for everyone, but they are perfect for some people.
Yeah.
They have a pretty high quality product, and they have an EHR. And if you see their product and you like their EHR, you could do a lot worse than Athena Health. Now, I hate pushing a non-competing vendor, but they are good. And if you're on Athena Health and you're happy with Athena Health, you're really not going to do much better.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to take that comment and let me make sure I answer one question. It's a question I get pretty much every time I talk about billing services. What should I be paying? What's the rate? And that's sometimes the question that people lead with. And all I can give you is a range of rates. Okay. Because, I mean, comparing two vendors who do different things for you, you know, if you have a vendor who does recall, if you have a vendor who meets with you every week, if you have a vendor who sends you a monthly report, that's a very different type of vendor than one who just submits your claims.
Yeah.
So right now, this is subjective. There's no scientific analysis of this. I mean, the range of rates that I've seen for pediatric offices, pardon me, are anywhere between 3.75%, which is shockingly low, and 12%.
Where's that vendor? I want to go talk to him.
Yeah, well, that was Athena, and they were trying to break into a market, and so they got sub 4%. They offered to a bunch of practices.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I doubt you could get it now. What I'd like to see
is a company where they say, you know, you get free HBO for 6 months, and then after that they jack it up, type of a thing.
Well, they know. I mean, if I were Jonathan Bush and ran Athena Health, I'd consider doing the same thing because you have a contract that doesn't let you get out, but even if it did, after 6 months. If they're not light burning your building down, you're not going to go to something else. You don't. The impact of your practice on switching is too big. They also, I mean, keep in mind, a billing service collecting, let's say, 4% on other specialties. That's a lot of money. 4% of an anesthesiology practice or a surgery practice is the equivalent of 12 or 15% of a peds office. Yeah. And so, at the same time, could you really have specialty-specific rates? No, that doesn't go over very well. So they have a flat rate. Some of these vendors have a flat rate, and peds just sort of get lucky that way. Yeah. What I like to see, and you know, Brandon, I really don't have any idea what you pay. I like to see.
You didn't give me a high, Chip.
I'm sorry.
You didn't give me a high. You gave me a low, but
look, I've seen 12%, 12 to 13%.
Wow,
that's you know, I suppose if they did all the right things, if they're paying for all the software, all the equipment. They're doing all certain, you know, still it's hard to get to 12 to 13%, but you know, you got to put it in context. I like to see, for what most people do standard, I like to see 6 to 8%.
Yeah.
You know, 6 to 7% is what I would call the norm. If you're at 8.5%, let's do some math on that. Okay, a 1% differential on a typical pediatrician. If a typical pediatrician brings in $600,000 a year, not all of them do. But let's say $600,000 a year. That's what a full-time PCC client tends to bring in. 1% difference is $60,000. So if you are looking at it, one vendor giving 7% or charging 7%, another vendor charging 8%, that 8% vendor had better provide you with $60,000 of better service or productivity or collections. Those that, you know, the difference between 6 and 9% is a couple employees in your office, and it's huge. So anything over 7%, I start to ask, like, well, what are they doing? Yeah. You know, and it could be fine, but that's the sweet spot right now.
Yeah. Let me tell you about the way that we made the arrangement.
Yes, please. And it's a good story.
That we have, I think right now we have the best of both worlds in terms of our circumstances. So basically what I approach them to doing is I do believe that it is important to have billing in-house. I mean, it's not that I'm against that. I'm just saying that sometimes the circumstances don't allow it. So within the circumstances, how is it that we can at least achieve that? So one is that it's our data, it's our software. So that allows me to jump in there and see exactly what's going on, and I don't have to rely on a month-and-a-half report to tell me how well they're collecting. So that's number one. The second thing is that, and this kind of goes hand in hand on how I view the front desk office, and I wrote a blog post about this a while ago, is that I think that the front desk office should be a command center. This should be kind of like the control tower at an airport. And what I mean by that is that the front desk should be empowered to do a lot more. At least in our office, because what happens in our office, we're not a large office, so there's not a whole lot of staff. Therefore, the staff, I can't designate specific tasks to every single person. We wear a lot of hats. That usually is what happens when you are in a small practice. So my front desk office, I said we need to move the billing to the front, essentially. the billing. Well, what I mean billing, what I mean is by collections. We need to stay on top of what people owe. So our front desk staff also knows billing, and what I mean by billing, that's not that they know every single detail, but they know what deductibles are. They know how to read a ledger. They know what's been submitted, what's been processed, how the company processed it, and read the biller's notes, so they can offer the service. They can offer the answers to the parent when they come in and say, "Did you bill that?" Well, what was happening is that when we didn't have none of that in our front office, and that was over to the billing company, we would just defer everything. We would just defer, well, we'll have the biller call it back. And then the biller, of course, doesn't know the patient, doesn't know the circumstances, doesn't know anything. So the rapport was a little bit different. And I felt that the front desk was able to do a much better job because we were a little bit more of the good guys, right? Because we're there and we're nice and so it was much easier for us to have conversations right then and there about the billing, and I thought it was going to be resolved faster. So what we started doing is I designated one person of the front desk, and she's generally our checkout person, that she's basically our billing kind of customer service representative. And what she does is that she sends out the letters for collections. She makes phone calls for collections, and then she's the first point of contact with our biller in Boston. And what I like about that is because she's known who she sent nasty's letters to, then she knows how to talk to the person, and she's been on the phone, so she's aware of what's going on. So when the patient comes up, she's like, "Oh yeah, listen, I processed the claim, I submitted it again," or "No, listen, I talked to so and so, and you are responsible for this." And it really made a big deal. So basically, and we also have another my office manager that works the front desk, and she does everything. But my office manager, she's also in charge of posting the patient payment. So that's what I want to talk about. My hybrid is that my billing company does all the insurance stuff, and they submit my monthly statements. After that, they essentially are done. We pick up from there. So once the statement goes out, we are responsible for collecting that portion of it, and we are responsible for posting that portion of it. I've made arrangement with my company, and we've come to an agreement on how that works, technology-wise, and everything in report-wise too. So we're clear about that. But what that has given me is the opportunity to do the collections in-house, but not have to worry about what I consider the boring of the two, the more boring of the two, which is the insurance collection, and the more tedious. Let me see. So we have a much better handle on our receivables. That's I already mentioned that, and I think that we are in a much better position to collect there in the front office because we are well better informed than a biller in a room somewhere else trying to call and collect something. Besides, they don't really have, because they have so many insurance stuff, they don't really dedicate a whole lot of time to the patient stuff. And again, we have much better rapport with the patients, and it just works out very well. And I'm very happy with that because we handle the patient portion of it.
Well, Brandon, one thing I'll say, any billing service whom you might work with who doesn't have a strong methodology for collecting money at the time of service when the patients are in front of you is not a billing service you want to work with. Your best time to collect money is always when the mom is standing right in front of you with her credit card or pocketbook or whatever.
That's why we shifted that, and that's why we do that there as opposed to having the billing company, or even if we would have an in-house billing, that's the way it would. I think that I would continue doing that. I'd have the billing person in the back room, but my
absolutely
our front desk collectors as well, debt collectors.
And what's nice, I'm glad you described it the way you did because you described your evolution. And the fact is you're working with a billing service that is able to evolve. I would very strongly state to anyone listening, if you do not work with a billing service that is able to evolve with you and that doesn't make it easy for you to collect every balance when the moms are standing in front of you or the dads, you're working with the wrong billing service. This would sort of be a segue so we can conclude today and not drive everyone crazy. I think one of the things that we'll do in a very near episode, maybe our next one, is we'll talk about maybe some of those front desk benchmarks. What can your front desk do to collect more money, and what's a good rate? And you know what I might do, Brand? I might even pick on you. You don't know this yet. I might even pick on you, and maybe if you're willing, I'll have you share some of your data so we can say, okay, how good were you at collecting your copays last month? We'll walk through. I'll show you how to do it. I'll show any practice how to do it. I think that'll be interesting.
Well, I think that's a great topic to talk next because I just happened to do this week a webinar with people at Fierce Practice. I always forget what they're
Fierce Practice Management,
which was about revenue leaks, and I talked about how to benchmark, how to benchmark any type of revenue leaks using the SMART system, a little acronym that has been around for a long time. So anyways, I did a brief example in what I used. Well, the example that I used was aging receivables on how to go about that, and then using some metrics and some goals. But it could easily be, I even mentioned it could even be applied to front desk collections. So I can share how we kind of go. We haven't done it we do it for collections, like for aging receivables, and hence that's why I use that as an example. I've never used it to see to measure how we're collecting co-payment, because my assumption is that we collect 100% of co-payments, which I know is not the case.
What do they say about assumptions? Yeah, and
I don't need to worry about that. I got it under control. We only have to worry about the stuff that we don't have under control. So, so I would absolutely feel comfortable, actually a little bit nervous, but actually I shouldn't say comfortable. I would be a little bit hesitant, but I would go ahead for the benefit of this podcast or video cast or however you want to call it, to show my numbers out there to see if I put my money where my mouth is. And if it isn't, well, then that's a great, either way will be valuable, because one, then they'll be more, collecting co-payments better. And if I am really good, then that just will absolutely give me bragging rights anytime I'm in front of a social crowd.
I will tell you.
Well, it's a win-win either way for me.
It's a win-win either way, because we're going to, we'll use you as a little bit of a fishbowl, and the worst that happens is you get better at something.
Exactly.
But you're absolutely right. I think any practice not collecting 95% or more of their co-pays at the time of service is making a mistake. But you know what? That's a topic for another day. So
I'm going to recap the business chip. I think that's called a teaser.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, Brandon and I have to work on our industry terms. So that is a teaser. I'm going to do a 10-second review of what we think you need to look for if you're considering using a billing service. We want someone who's pediatric specific. We want someone who's responsive. We want someone who provides you with good references. We want someone who has well-defined roles. Brandon just gave a really good example of what his office does. You want to know whether your billing service is local, somewhat local, or even in this country. You want access to your data. You want contracts that don't lock you in, and you want contracts that don't preclude you from having an EHR that you want. And if I could summarize that entire thing, I would say you need a billing service with whom you have a relationship. All right? Everything that Brandon described talks about how he actually knows and speaks to the principals at his billing service, and they evolve with him. If you have a billing service that doesn't pick up the phone, doesn't return your calls, where you're talking to different people every day, where you can't get a straight answer, that's not a billing service you want.
My summary is very simple, because you already touched on the great points. Is what I think has made us work really well is that it wasn't so much, the billing company is a good part of it. It's a big part of the puzzle because they've allowed us to do this. But I think that the key issue for me that I like to give to people is that you should look for ways, and this didn't happen for us immediately. This is probably like a year and a half transition until I felt 100% comfortable, is empower the front desk to do a lot more than what they need to do. And what I mean by that, I don't mean burden them with it, because they still have check-in people and things like that. What I did is be smart about and empower them to be like a command center. The people that are there should to be able to have a discernment to decide when to talk to a patient, when not to, when to put people in. But those are other issues in terms of office flow. But also I think that if you empower them to have and to give them the training, sufficient training for them to feel comfortable to talk about money, that goes a long ways in your collection efforts, regardless. It's great when you have a great billing company, but if you don't, then that still is a good thing to do. So regardless of where you move forward, empower your front desk office to feel comfortable about talking about money.
All right, that's awesome. So when are we going to run this? We'll be running this like a day or two after Christmas.
Yes.
And we're going to send a notice, all the usual things. It's going to get a little bit better every time. Brandon, thank you again as always.
Thank you, Chip. This is the
easiest thing I do.
Great info.
All right, have a good holiday. Talk to you soon.
Bye.